I was standing in the quiet kitchen when my brother's voice finally broke. "You sold the house," he asked, disbelief cracking through the line. "You had no right." I looked down at my hands. Steady. Calm. The same hands that had saluted flags at dawn, signed deployment orders without question, and packed duffel bags, knowing I wouldn't be home for Christmas. "Yes," I said. "The house is sold." "You can't do this to us," he said. In the background, I could hear his wife crying. That was our home. And the honeymoon, those tickets. I canceled them, I replied, my voice even. "Everything that was in my name is settled." "You're heartless," he said. "After everything." I closed my eyes for a moment, not in pain, but in recognition. "No," I said quietly, "I'm finished." I ended the call and stood there alone, the refrigerator humming softly, the house empty in that echoing way it gets when something has finally been removed. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt lighter, like a pack I'd carried for years had finally been set down. That was the end of the story. But it didn't begin there. I served my country for 23 years. Army. Logistics, mostly keeping people supplied, moving, and alive. Not glamorous work, but necessary. The kind of service that rarely makes headlines, but holds everything together behind the scenes. I was never loud about it. I didn't wear my service like a badge at family dinners. I did my job, came home when I could, and learned early that pride doesn't need an audience. While I was gone through deployments, long trainings, and missed milestones, my family stayed home. My parents aged quietly. My younger brother Mark built a life that looked solid from the outside. College degree, a good job, a house in a nice neighborhood, church on Sundays. I missed a lot of birthdays, a lot of holidays. I sent cards instead, sometimes money, sometimes just silence because there wasn't much to say that would fit into a phone call. After my last deployment, I retired. No ceremony, just paperwork and a folded flag. I moved back to my home state and into a modest one-bedroom apartment near the VA clinic. I liked the quiet. I liked knowing where everything was, and that no one expected anything from me unless they said so plainly. Mark, on the other hand, always needed something, though he rarely called it that. The house was the biggest thing. Years earlier, after his first marriage fell apart, he called me late one night. His voice was tight, embarrassed. He couldn't qualify for a mortgage on his own. His credit wasn't strong enough. He needed help. I had VA loan benefits I hadn't used yet. I bought the house in my name legally and cleanly, so he and his family would have stability. The understanding was simple. He'd live there, take care of it, and when things improved, we'd revisit the arrangement. Things never quite improved. I paid the property taxes. I covered major repairs. When he struggled, I didn't lecture. I just handled it. That's how I'd been trained. You see a problem, you solve it. You don't ask for praise. Over time, the house stopped being the place my sister helped me with and became my house. Friends referred to it that way. So did his new girlfriend, the woman who would eventually become his wife. I didn't correct them. Then came the wedding. I heard about it the way most things seem to happen now, through social media and relatives. Photos of venues, comments about dresses, my mother's excited phone calls about seating charts and catering. I waited for the invitation. It never came. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Weddings are chaotic. People forget things. But as weeks passed, it became clear I wasn't expected. I finally called Mark one afternoon. I kept my tone light. "Hey," I said. "Just checking. I didn't miss anything in the mail, did I?" He went quiet. That pause told me more than his words ever could. "Well," he said slowly, "it's kind of complicated." I waited. "My wife doesn't want you there," he said. "She thinks you're pathetic." The word landed softly, like something already rehearsed. Pathetic, I repeated. You know, he said quickly. Still single, living small, all that military stuff in the past. She doesn't think it fits the image. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I looked at the framed flag on my wall, the one I'd folded myself the day I retired. I see, I said. She doesn't mean it personally, he added. It's just the wedding. We want it to be perfect. I thanked him for being honest. That seemed to confuse him more than anger would have. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, not replaying the insult, but examining something deeper. Respect. Or rather, how quietly it had disappeared. I thought about the house. The honeymoon tickets I'd already bought as a gift, non-refundable until a certain date. The years of support I'd offered without conditions. And I realized something that had taken me decades to learn. Support without respect isn't generosity, it's permission. That night, I didn't make any calls. I didn't confront anyone. I slept well the way you do after finally making a decision you've been avoiding. The next morning, I opened the folder in my drawer, the one with deeds, loan documents, and account statements. Everything was clear. Everything was in my name. Everything was legal. I canceled the honeymoon reservations. 10 minutes, no questions asked. I contacted a real estate agent I trusted and told her I was ready to sell the house. I didn't announce any of it. I didn't issue warnings. I didn't demand apologies. I simply stopped carrying what was no longer mine to carry. The wedding came and went. I spent that day volunteering at the VA organizing donated supplies. That evening, I cooked myself a simple meal and went to bed early. Mark didn't know yet. He would soon. But by then I had already stepped away. And for the first time in years, the silence felt earned. The morning after the wedding photos appeared online, I took my time with breakfast. 2 eggs toast coffee poured slowly into a mug I'd had since my first duty station. I didn't scroll. I didn't click. I already knew what I'd see: smiles arranged for the camera, happiness measured in angles and filters. I'd learned long ago that appearances can be convincing, even when they rest on something fragile. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. A school bus hissed to a stop. Someone across the street swept their porch. Ordinary sounds, steady and familiar. That was the America I knew. The one I'd served. The one that kept moving whether you were invited to the celebration or not. I went for my morning walk the same route I took most days. Past the small brick church with its white sign announcing bake sales and Bible study. Past the elementary school playground, still quiet at that hour. Past the diner where retirees gathered every morning, always at the same booths, discussing the weather like it was breaking news. I nodded to a few familiar faces. No one asked questions. At our age, people understand that some things don't need commentary. As I walked, I thought about how the wedding had gone from something I assumed I'd attend to something I wasn't even meant to notice. That shift hadn't happened overnight. It had been building for years quietly, the way entitlement does when it's never challenged. Mark hadn't always been like this. We grew up close enough to share chores and secrets, close enough to fight and make up without keeping score. But when I left for the army, something changed. Distance does that. It creates gaps, and people fill those gaps with assumptions. I came home on leave when I could. I sent money when I couldn't. I stayed quiet because explaining military life to civilians often felt like translating a language no one really wanted to learn. Over time, my role shifted. I was no longer the older sister with advice. I became the backup plan, the safety net, the quiet solution when something went wrong. I let it happen because it seemed easier than pushing back, easier than being the difficult one, easier than admitting I wanted something in return that wasn't material. Respect. That afternoon, I had a routine appointment at the VA clinic. The waiting room was full as usual. Men and women my age sat with canes walkers, spouses beside them. A shared understanding hung in the air. No one boasted. No one complained loudly. We nodded when our eyes met. A woman about my age sat down beside me. Navy veteran. We exchanged a few words about the weather, about the clinic running behind schedule. Nothing more. When my name was called, I stood steady and sure, and followed the nurse down the hall. That steadiness had been hard-earned. It wasn't something I was willing to give up for anyone's image. When I got home, there was a message from my mother on the answering machine. Her voice was bright, tired in that way excitement makes you. "The wedding was beautiful," she said. "Everyone kept asking about you. I told them you had other commitments." I listened without reacting. She didn't ask why I wasn't there. She didn't ask if I was hurt. Sometimes people accept the explanation that makes things easiest for them. I didn't call her back right away. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I reviewed the documents again, not because I needed reassurance, but because I wanted to be absolutely certain. Every decision I'd made had been careful, thought through, within the lines. The house, the accounts, the tickets, all mine, all handled properly. That evening, Mark called. "Did you see the photos?" he asked, trying for casual. "No," I said. "Oh, well, it went really well." I'm glad I replied, and I meant it. There was a pause. "Listen," he said. "About the house. The realtor showed it today. What's going on?" "I'm selling it," I said. His breath caught. "You can't just decide that." I replied. "And I have." "This is because of the wedding, isn't it?" he asked, his voice sharpening. "It's because of respect," I said. That was one comment, he snapped. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I thought about the years of silence, the support, the assumptions. "I would have come if I'd been invited," I said. "That should tell you something." He didn't answer. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked finally. "I trust you'll figure it out," I replied. The call ended without resolution. That was fine. Resolution wasn't what I was after. Clarity was. Over the next few days, the calls came more frequently, from relatives, from friends of the family. Some asked gently, others hinted that I was being harsh. I listened. I thanked them for their concern. I didn't explain myself. Explaining invites debate. Debate invites judgment. I had lived too long under judgment to volunteer for more. One evening, my father called. He wasn't a man of many words. "You did a lot for him," he said after a long pause. "Yes," I replied. "You didn't have to," he added. "No," I said, "I didn't." That was all he said, but it was enough. As the week wore on, the reality began to settle in for Mark. Notices, timelines, conversations he hadn't planned to have so soon after his wedding. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't feel satisfaction. What I felt was something quieter. Alignment. For the first time in years, my actions matched my values. I wasn't rescuing. I wasn't explaining. I was simply standing where I belonged. The invitation never came, but clarity did. And sometimes clarity is the beginning of everything that follows. By the time the house officially went under contract, the truth had already settled in my bones. Not the truth about money or property, but about roles who I had been in my brother's life, and who I had quietly allowed myself to become. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger burns fast and burns out. What I felt was something slower, heavier. Recognition. I had been holding things together for a long time, and no one had noticed because nothing ever fell apart. I spent that morning organizing paperwork the way I always did when something mattered. Neat stacks, labeled folders, dates double-checked. It was how I'd been trained, and it was how I kept my emotions from running ahead of my judgment. The house documents were straightforward. Deed in my name. Mortgage paid on time. Maintenance records thorough. I'd treated that property the same way I treated every assignment in uniform, responsibly, quietly, and with the understanding that people depended on it, even if they never thought about who made it work. When Mark first moved in, it had been temporary, a rough patch after his divorce. He was embarrassed, and I didn't press him. He promised he'd get back on his feet, refinance, make it official. I believed him. Years passed. The neighborhood improved. Property values rose. Mark remarried. The temporary became permanent without anyone ever saying it out loud. And because I never objected, no one questioned it. That was the pattern. When the roof needed replacing, I paid for it. When the water heater failed, I handled it. When taxes went up, I adjusted my budget. I didn't mention it at holidays. I didn't bring it up when money was tight for me. I told myself that family takes care of family. What I didn't admit was that I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped. That afternoon, I met with my financial advisor, a calm, respectful man who'd learned not to rush me. He laid everything out plainly. "You're in a strong position," he said, "but much of your stability has been extended outward." I nodded. "I know." He paused. "Do you feel appreciated?" It wasn't a question I was used to answering. "I feel useful," I said carefully. He didn't smile. Those aren't the same thing. We talked through the implications of selling the house, long-term care, medical expenses, my own future. Things women my age don't always plan for until it's too late, because we've spent our lives making sure everyone else is secure first. As I drove home, his words stayed with me. Useful isn't the same as valued. That evening, I opened my laptop and reviewed the honeymoon reservations. A beachfront hotel. Non-refundable after the end of the week. I'd booked it months earlier, imagining my brother starting fresh without stress. I'd done it quietly, the way I did most things. My name was on every confirmation, my card on every charge. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Canceling felt symbolic in a way selling the house didn't. The house was long-term, structural. The honeymoon was emotional. A gift meant to mark joy. But joy that excludes you isn't something you're obligated to fund. I canceled the reservations. The confirmation email came through seconds later. Clean. Final. I closed the laptop and sat back my apartment quiet, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I didn't feel petty. I felt resolved. The next day, Mark called again. "They're showing the house," he said, his voice strained. "People are walking through our rooms." "I gave notice," I replied. "You knew this was coming." "No, I didn't," he said sharply. "You never said you'd actually go through with it." "That's because I didn't ask permission," I said. He was quiet, then laughed in disbelief. "You're acting like some kind of landlord now." "I always was," I said gently. That landed harder than any accusation. "You never complained," he said. "You never said it bothered you." "That doesn't mean it didn't matter," I replied. He didn't have an answer for that. After we hung up, I sat at the small desk by my window and wrote down something I wished I'd learned sooner. Silence can be generous, but it can also be misleading. As the days passed, I told my parents what was happening. My mother cried, saying she wished everyone could just move on. My father listened quietly. "You carried more than your share," he said at last. That was all, but it was enough. The sale moved forward quickly. The market was good. Buyers were eager. Everything I'd done to maintain the house paid off not just financially, but in clarity. When the closing date was set, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not triumph, just readiness. The night before the signing, I slept deeply. No second guessing, no rehearsed arguments. I knew why I was doing this, and that knowledge steadied me. I wasn't punishing my brother. I wasn't teaching a lesson. I was reclaiming responsibility for my own life. And for the first time in years, I felt the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you stand and why. The closing took place on a Thursday morning in a small office downtown, the kind with beige walls, framed certificates, and a pot of coffee that had been sitting too long on the warmer. I arrived 10 minutes early out of habit. Punctuality was one of those things the Army never really lets you forget. The buyer arrived with their agent. Pleasant people, polite, no drama. The notary checked my ID and paused when she saw the veteran designation. "Thank you for your service," she said softly. I nodded once. "You're welcome." I signed where I was told to sign, initialed where I was told to initial. Every motion deliberate, unhurried. When the final document was complete, the notary slid it into a folder and smiled. "That's it," she said. "You're all set." I stood, shook hands, and walked out into the late morning sun, feeling something settle inside me. Not excitement, not loss, completion. By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone was already buzzing. Mark. I let it ring. Not because I wanted to avoid him, but because I needed to keep my footing. When I answered, his voice was tight, controlled, in the way people sound when they're trying not to panic. "They accepted an offer," he said. "The realtor told us. Is that true?" "Yes," I said. "You didn't even talk to me first," he snapped. "I did," I replied. "You just didn't think it mattered." "That house was our life," he said. "You knew that." "I knew you lived there," I said evenly. "I didn't know you respected me." There was a sharp breath on the other end. Somewhere behind him, I could hear his wife speaking, her voice raised and emotional. He muted the phone for a moment, then came back on. "She says you're doing this to punish us," he said. "I'm not doing this to you," I replied. "I'm doing it for me." "You're choosing money over family," he accused. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes briefly. "I'm choosing boundaries over silence." He didn't respond. The call ended abruptly. That afternoon, I transferred the remaining funds out of the joint accounts I'd quietly maintained for years. Emergency money, maintenance reserves. All of it moved back where it belonged, into my own retirement and medical planning. I didn't drain anything that wasn't mine. I didn't touch a dollar I hadn't earned. Every transaction was clean, documented, and justified. Still, the reaction was immediate. My phone rang again. This time it was my sister-in-law. "I don't understand how you can live with yourself," she said without greeting. "We're newly married. This is cruel." I listened. I always listened. "When you decided I didn't belong at your wedding," I said calmly, "you made a choice. I'm just responding to it." That was one comment she shot back. "You're destroying our future over a comment." "No," I said. "I'm ending a pattern." She hung up on me. The wedding photos kept circulating. Smiling faces. Carefully framed happiness. People commented on how perfect everything looked. No one posted about the quiet panic setting in behind the scenes. On Saturday, the day after the closing, I spent the morning at the VA Volunteer Center, helping sort donated clothing and supplies. A woman I'd worked with for years asked if everything was all right. She'd noticed I seemed lighter. "I am," I said. She smiled. "Good." That evening, I cooked myself a simple dinner and ate it at my small table. The sun dipped low outside my window, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt tired in a good way, the way you do after finishing a difficult but necessary task. Late that night, my phone rang again. "Mark." This time his voice wasn't angry, it was small. "They want us out by the end of the month," he said. "We don't have anywhere lined up yet." I gave the legal notice, I replied gently. "I can't change the timeline." "You could help us find something," he said quickly. "Just for a little while, until we get settled." There it was. The reflex. The assumption that I would step back in if things became uncomfortable enough. "I believe you'll find a solution," I said. "You're really doing this," he said, disbelief seeping through. "You're really walking away." "I'm not walking away from you," I replied. "I'm walking away from being taken for granted." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." That told me everything. "I always do what I say I'll do," I said. "You know that." He didn't answer. I ended the call softly and set my phone down. The wedding came and went without me. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I didn't explain. Silence did what arguments never could. Over the next week, the reality settled in. Movers, boxes, conversations my brother hadn't planned on having so soon. Friends who asked questions he didn't have easy answers for. Family members called me, some carefully, some with frustration. I listened. I acknowledged their feelings. I didn't justify myself. My father called one evening. He cleared his throat before speaking. "You stood your ground," he said. "Yes," I replied. "That's not easy," he added. No, I agreed, it isn't. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, the quiet thick, but not oppressive. For the first time in years, I felt fully aligned. My actions matched my values. My silence had meaning. I wasn't proud of causing pain, but I wasn't ashamed of protecting my dignity. No argument, no spectacle, just action. And sometimes that's the most powerful statement a person can make. The first week after the closing passed without much noise. That in itself felt strange. I had braced for anger accusations, maybe even a dramatic confrontation at my door. None of that happened. Instead, there was a quiet settling like dust after a long day of moving furniture. Things had shifted, and everyone was trying to understand the new shape of their lives. I went back to my routines: morning walks, VA appointments, volunteering twice a week at the community center. The rhythm steadied me. At our age, routine isn't boredom, it's ballast. It keeps you upright when emotional waters get choppy. Still, the silence around my brother grew heavier. Family has a way of talking without saying much. By midweek, the calls started. An aunt asked if everything was smoothed over. A cousin suggested I might be too hard given that Mark was newly married. No one mentioned the wedding invitation. No one repeated the word pathetic. Those details seemed to fall out of the story when it was retold. I listened politely. I didn't correct anyone. I'd learned in the army that you don't win by shouting over misinformation. You win by staying steady until the truth becomes obvious on its own. One afternoon, I sat with a small group of veterans at the community center. We met every Thursday, drank bad coffee, and talked about whatever came up. Some weeks it was health issues. Some weeks it was memories that had waited decades to surface. That day, a man across from me, a retired Marine, said something that stuck. "People don't realize how much you're doing for them until you stop," he said. "Then they call it betrayal." No one argued with him. Driving home later, his words followed me. I wasn't being punished for what I'd done. I was being punished for what I'd stopped doing. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me careful. Mark called that evening. His voice was tired, not sharp. "We're staying with her sister," he said. "Just for now." "I hope it works out," I replied. "It's crowded," he added. "Not what we planned." "I imagine it's stressful," I said. He hesitated. "People keep asking why you weren't at the wedding." I waited. I didn't know what to tell them, he admitted. I didn't think it would look this bad. There it was. Not regret for how I'd been treated, but concern for how things appeared. "I'm not responsible for appearances," I said gently, "only for my integrity." Silence stretched between us. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. The question surprised me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. "No," I said. "I don't hate you." "Then why does this hurt so much?" he asked. "Because you're feeling the absence of something you depended on," I replied. "And you're not used to naming it." He didn't argue. That told me more than anything else. Over the next few weeks, his calls became less frequent but more thoughtful, less accusation, more reflection. He stopped asking for help and started asking questions about my service, about why